Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you coming back for this week. I'm excited. Obviously, I have military background. It's a huge passion for me. But I ran across Joe McNamara, who's our guest today, who is a 10-year combat decorated veteran. And first off, Joe, thanks for that before I go any further, right? But now he leads and he's the CEO and founder of the Iron Leader team. And really what caught my attention is he goes out and he's developing leadership solutions and a culture, which I love just talking that, if those of you have been with us, in terms of individuals and teams, right? For corporations, for large and small, for athletic organizations. And I'm telling you, his background and his insight is one that I want to dive into. So, Joe, thank you for being here, man.
Thank you so much for having me fired up.
Yeah, no. Let's go right there, man. Before I go anywhere, what'd you do in the service, man? I know you're a Marine, and I know, that alone. I had a lot of friends who were Marines. I was an Army guy. Like, I get it, right? Totally. You have a little bit of a mindset, but what did you do in the service?
Yeah, so I was an infantry officer, in ground force commander on that side in combat, multiple combat deployments, a lot of it to start, and then I ended up by the time before I got out, I ended up commanding at notorious Marine Corps boot camp there in Paris Island, South Carolina for 3.5 years there as well. But a large side of that is it's timing, right? Anybody who's been in the military understands that. And I say I was from a young infantry officer. I got to do everything that you could dream to do as a young commander there. So some of it's just timing and the kind of the luck of where you end up and what you're doing and the people that you're around. But loved every second of it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you again. I said in the opening, and I was a little bit rushed with it, but seriously, thank you. I was in when, pre 9/11, and I tell folks that when you raise your hand post 9/11, that's just different. Okay, I mean, it is. So thank you for that. And I'm sure offline we can have share stories of MREs and stuff like that. That stuff never changes no matter what service you're in or how old you are, right? There's always that little laugh of trading MREs and stuff like that around. So
That's
we'll
right.
get to that offline. But I want to get to the meat and potatoes for people who are joining this, right? So you founded this organization, the Iron Leader team. Let's just start there. In your words, what is that?
So I pull it back to identity and assignments, right? And as you know, people, it's tough to go from warfighter, gunfighter, and then get out and transition into certain areas. And a lot of people get hung up and stuck around that change in assignments because they confuse identity and assignments. And the way that I boil that down is my identity in that is rooted in Christ, but I'm a steward of my experiences. Mostly not just my experiences, but probably more so the people who I was blessed and fortunate to come across and serve alongside, the things that we learn from there. And the assignments will change periodically throughout my life. And so I think the assignments back in the military, those were pretty specific in what those looked like. But as you transition out of the military and come into the civilian sector, I just looked at this opportunity, both from combat in the extreme scenarios that we faced and the success that we had, but in scenarios that you can't replicate, right, in real life. But then transitioning over and commanding at Paris Island, I've started to watch this formula, right? Kind of did it backwards in that regard, but I started to watch this formula of how we can take something so raw with as many flaws and scars and problems and backgrounds of what you have and pull this into a functioning team that then we refine and we refine and we refine and we can send it out into the most complex environments in the globe and be successful. I looked at that and said, we've got a very unique skill set here. How can we be stewards of that experience and give that back? And more so with the teammates that I was fortunate to be around. Some of it is how can we build the platform to engage and unleash these guys that have had 26, 32 years in the special operations community or aviation, whatever it is. They bring a very, very unique skill set that we are able to put into a process and then deliver that both through high school and collegiate athletics and then through corporate teams as well to take those lessons that translate and cascade across any type of industry.
No, man. I mean, I think leadership and culture are my two favorite words to talk about, right?
That's
And they
right.
kind of go together, right? I mean, 'cause I know the leader. I mean, I know you'd agree. You know, the leader sets the culture, right? How you lead sets the culture. And you can look at, I mean, we always look at sports teams as the easy example. They're on TV, they're, etc. But you can look at civilian corporations down to, in my mind, the lowest level, especially now that we're all, hybrid or remote, it's even more so, you know. Now, I do want to get to this. When you go to your website, it's phenomenal, by the way. And I want to get into some of the stats you have on there. But you show some folks military. I think there's some folks, like in like truly like you're walking around, you're in a real, like infantry mode. Do you ever get some folks in the business world to kind of back off and say, hey, that may not be our style, that may not be our way. This is more military-esque. It's not really our piece. How would you offer up a viewpoint on that if someone says, hey, that's more military related more than business related,
Yeah,
for us?
it's a fair question. And I think that what we look at is we're talking about the principles, right? In optimizing the human performance element inside of organizations. And what we've learned is as we've harnessed those processes, just as I was saying, be it at something as a basic level of formulating individuals and turning them into teams, or and then building and training that team to be able to go into any type of environment around the globe. These are principles that have been tested where the stakes are the highest. And so, what we don't do is come in and try to implement a militant structure inside of certain things. That's not what it is. But go back to your point about leadership and culture. There are certain things that we have learned along the way that this is the pathway, and a lot of times it's very uncomfortable to perform at that level. And so, what I found is where the magic lies is organizations that are looking for that level of high performance. This becomes an accelerant to the good things that they're already doing. If it's, people look for different things, that's great. Good, a lot, see how they can find it where it goes, but it's not for us. It's not necessarily a militant piece. That's obviously the background of where we've forged a lot of these lessons and
Mm-hmm.
made many, many mistakes that a lot of our goal is, hey, we've made some of these mistakes, and our goal is to give that back where we can help you not make that same mistake.
Yeah. So, I mean, right when we came on, you and I were just talking about you going in and helping teams and such, and you kind of took it back and step and said, no, we start at the leader, right? So when you go in, if you're going into a 100-person company, do you start at like the director level, VP level, manager, like first line leader? Like, where is your point of entry into an organization talking about these principles before you kind of expand it out a little bit?
Yeah, I think well, one, I think it's always important, as you said, leaders are kind of establishing the cultural norms and what they're trying to do. And so I think it's really getting up there and understanding their goals, their vision, their mission for what they're trying to drive. That's important to what we do. We're not bringing in a perspective or changing the culture and trying to do certain things. We understand the behavioral pieces. So I think it's critical to start with them to understand kind of that vision and the mission and where they're trying to go with their organization. But then, and pretty quickly, I love to get down with the small unit leaders.
Mm-hmm.
That is where the things break in the middle, right? Everything. It breaks in the middle. So if we can get an understanding from the top and then get down and start to equip and build effective small unit leaders, that's how we start to strengthen. So kind of from that middle and inside out of that is where we like to grow and approach it from.
And so anybody who's been in the military is going to go right back to what makes the American military great. And I'm talking any Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and you know where I'm going. It's that first, line leader of, your sergeant, your brand new second lieutenant, you know, those are the folks. That's what you're talking about, right?
That's
Those
right.
folks who took like three levels down some direction, now have to kind of implement it on their own, lead a team, probably with limited experience as well, and then you build the foundation from there.
That's
Okay,
right. Well, and you're
I
able
got
to pull, and that's why I say getting that clarity from the senior leadership team allows us to weave in the things that are important to them into the frameworks that we have built and the training packages that we have built so that we can continue to reinforce that message. But it drives that clarity from up front and drives alignment throughout the organization so that those leaders can kind of understand where they're trying to go. And so that, and then we dig into the behavioral piece of it. But they're essentially kind of a four-way stop, right? Like their responsibility and why that breaks is in the vast majority of them, by the way, we get that's the cool part about our jobs. I get to meet so many different types of leaders in different industries, and the vast majority are awesome, fully capable. But there's a training gap, and there's it's just different on how we train and develop on the military side, and what is normal on kind of in athletics or in the business side of the house. And so that training gap is where we try to come and fill that to equip them with the tools to be more effective when not just leading down in the people who are under their charge, but cross functionally as well. But certainly, and probably the most overlooked, is how does that small unit leader lead up and start to influence up where they've got the better situational awareness of certain things and how we can shape that up with the leaders.
I want to dive in there. So heck with my notes over here. But let's go there. So talk about leading up. Talk about, if I'm a first time manager, I've come out of school, I've done my thing. I'm, in a production line, or I'm in a marketing agency. You take your pick. I'm a first line leader for the first time in my career. And you're talking about leading up. I get the lateral, I get the people who are directing to me, I get that. Talk about leading up and how you view that.
Yeah, I think some of this, if I step that back, I think it's in two things. Well, the first part, if I take a step back to what you said earlier about kind of the militant piece of how we diffuse some of that, is where I think people have a misconception of what real leadership looks like. And look, in the military, you ask me, oh, it's all command, it's all giving orders, it's of course you're in charge, people just follow you. It's yelling, it's screaming, it's intimidation. Does that exist in the military? Absolutely. Is it effective? No. And the best teams that you've ever been around, and kind of the irony of those that don't understand it is the best lead through love. They really care about their people, they care about their teams. And so when we think about that, it starts with setting them up for success. When I need leadership out of my team, if I really love them, I'm not just going to expect and demand excellence out of them and not give them any training. Who wants that, right? Like that wears on you, and you're constantly set up for failure in that regard. So I think in that first regard is, how do we do that? How do I really care about my team and set them up? So I think there's a tone that starts from the top down in the willingness to pour in and develop. But when you go into leading up, it starts with gaining clarity. Yeah, probably the best advice I've ever heard somebody say in the business world, and I think it applies anywhere, but it's find out what's important to your boss and be really, really good at it. Right?
Yes.
And there's so many people, when we attribute that, be it, any type of marksmanship training or snipers or whatever it may be, is like that's this concept of you can't hit a target that you can't see. And so if I'm not communicating with my boss and I'm not having that conversation and trying to fully understand their intent, where they're trying to go, what do they want out of me as a leader, then I'm left to, or kind of vulnerable to be showing up every day hoping that I'm doing the things that they want. So the first step in leading up is building that relationship with your senior leaders to understand their intent, understand what they want out of me as a leader, and then start doing those things. The second part is building that relationship continuously, because as you start to operate into there, you are going to understand. You're kind of, you have the best situational awareness when you're down in the middle. You're doing the work, right? And if you've built that relationship and that communication eventually, and you learn how to push some of that information up, it's that push versus pull relationship, right? You start pushing and feeding the boss with certain information, you start to develop that trust in a relationship of going, hey, well, now I can steer this a little bit. Hey, this might be a better way. I know you're trying to do this, but this might be a better way to do this. And we do that in terms of using precise words precisely. right?
Mm.
So from a mid-level leader, what I try and encourage them to change is when you're communicating up, is leveraging and using the words I intend to, right? So if I'm talking up, I come in and hey, boss, here's the situation. I intend to do this. And what we see in a lot of different places is it's the opposite. They may go in and talk to their boss if they even have the opportunity, right? They may go in and say, hey, here's the situation. What do you want to do about it? And when that happens, that type of structure, you end up really having kind of people who shut their brains off. They're not really thinking across the spectrum, right? They're just waiting to be told what to do and then acting. And intentional or unintentional, the consequence that comes with that is you start to stifle some of the initiative, the problem solving, the creativity at those levels. And if you can start to develop that communication of we call it, kind of intent-based communication in communicating up, here's the situation, this is what I intend to do, it speeds up that loop of execution. One, it challenges those mid-level leaders to be thinking one or two levels above where they're at. How are they going to receive this? What information do they need with what I'm going to do? Two, I have to think creatively about whatever I'm engaging in, and I'm coming up with a solution or two. And then three, when they communicate it up, it just speeds things up because now, the boss or the leader, he's able to ask a couple clarifying questions. Well, have you talked to Dave about this? Yes, Dave's on board. Well, have you thought about this? Yes. Here's why we can't do it this way and we need to go this path. Awesome. Well, now you've allowed and you've pushed this control down to them, but you as the leader have the warm and fuzzy that they're thinking through this the right way. They've asked the right questions. I get to slap the table and say, "Hey, cool, go execute." And now I'm aware I won't get blindsided. So there's a lot of intangible benefits that come just by a little simple phrase of taking that initiative to go, we have thought through this, and I'm going and informing the boss, this is what I intend to do, and allow them to quickly, yes, no, make this adjustment, go. But it keeps control down at the small unit leader level.
Man, that's great. I made a point. Like I so bad wanted to go and add on to what you're saying, but I was like, I want to make sure that is just crisp because literally that's 4 minutes of just. I mean, like I always talk about it, and like every episode has got a few points. That's one right there. I love, right? That someone can come in and go, okay, I get it. I can implement that tomorrow, right? I can go in and say, hey, boss, like on your annual review, like, hey, what metrics are you graded on? Okay, maybe I should help you with that, right? I remember, military, again, we're coming from different, as I age myself a little bit, we're coming from different eras, but I do remember writing, the eval prep document. It had to include my boss's goals, and then I have mine on top. And I never quite understood it, right? I was just too young back then to kind of grasp it.
Yeah.
Now I do. Now I get it, right? And how you defined it is perfect. So you mentioned right in the beginning, though, you said what you do sometimes causes people to be uncomfortable. What part? Is it the self-evaluation of like who they are as a leader, where people say, "Hey, I'm pretty good. I'm not bad," and all of a sudden they have that look in the mirror experience, and maybe there's some stuff to really tweak more than they thought. Is it more of that?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, right? I think that, like I said, we see a lot of different people, and they're great. But the reality of leadership and the burden that comes with it, right, is everything and everybody that we are entrusted with should be growing and thriving each day. And when you really sit back and think on that, it's like, hey, the things that I'm touching, my family, my kids, my wife, how am I doing in those areas? My job, my community, all of these things from a leadership spectrum should be growing and thriving. And it can feel overwhelming at times. But the vast majority of people, they're capable, but it's the difference of capability versus willingness that I can boil down from all of the athletic teams that we've worked with, the different organizations. Excuse me, that's how I've summed this up is that's the number one difference. What is the driving factor that allows one person to ignite and be a driving force for good compared to all these others that want to be the leaders? It's the willingness. And that willingness is often what makes people uncomfortable because it requires sacrifice. It requires, giving things up or working at different hours or working on certain things that you don't want to do. The discipline that comes with that is often a hurdle that most people just aren't willing to do. And when you can marry this up and compare yourself to the world's greatest of what they're doing, there you realize that there's levels to this game. And how willing are you to do these things to be at that level is typically where you find that rub of people are like, I hear you, but I'm not willing to give up X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're all human, right?
Yep.
And then you start saying, okay, and but kind of what you hit on the same thing is your love of your team. And I think that's so powerful, right? I mean, and it flashes back to my brain now because it goes back in my mind to the willingness,
Yep.
right? Hey, I'm willing to do a lot for my team, right? I work for them, right? That's how I was brought up in the military. That's how I was brought up wherever, right? And I still have that. And I think, you know, that phrase alone, I think means a lot, like, hey, in terms of like what I'm willing to do and what, a lot of people say, well, when something goes wrong, who's willing to raise their hand and say, hey, that was on me? You
That's
know,
right.
I didn't, train them effectively. That's on me.
Right.
Right. And stuff like that. Right. And I think we grew up with it a little bit, but I think it's important, those kind of lessons. Right. Now,
Your team deserves it. That's the part that makes people uncomfortable is the way that we lay it out and the way that we push this through is, that willingness portion. I'm not throwing this out there to allow people to make those choices to go, well, I'll do this, but I won't do that. Is we're going to lay out this leadership success profile of what some of the greatest leaders that I've ever been around or I've seen, the things that they did, and these are the steps that it takes to get there. And you don't get to be like, well, I'll do one, but I won't do those seven. Like that's where it makes people uncomfortable. Is your team deserves you pouring into all of these areas and making sacrifice. And the reality of it is, a lot of people get uncomfortable with what that really looks like.
that's okay. Change requires you to be uncomfortable. And I think that's good, and I'm sure you've been in the organizations where some people are like, okay, like maybe this isn't for me,
Yeah.
and that's okay too,
Well, and,
you know.
and at the business side of it, we see that a lot too, right? Is there are certain people, and even in the sports side, right? We try to make people leaders or in a leadership role, and the reality of it is, I'm okay with you just being an All-American. I need All-American teammates. I need All-American followers. It's when they're not in that leadership role, you're doing one of two things. You're either leading or you're following. But if you're not in one of those two buckets, now you become a liability because now you're the person who's complaining or casting negativity or, trying to recruit other people to your ideas. And that's where you start to see the cultural breakdowns with things. And it just reminds me of, there's a quote that I had heard, and as I think about and we posted that is settling for the comfort of our dysfunction is often easier than the cost of the transformation. And that's where it goes back to those leaders. You can start to outline what we think you're willing and what you need to be doing. That's where that discomfort starts to lie. Are we willing to pay that cost to be a leader? And I fully appreciate the ones who are willing to sit there and go, nah, that's not for me. I'm a really good technician at what I do. This is what I want to do. Great. I need you to be the best technician that you can be. We'll find the people who can get in and lead and drive the team forward. We need those people too.
That's powerful right there. If you're not, either you're a leader or you're a follower and a great follower, or if you're anything else, then you're causing the team to kind of take a step backwards, or you're, causing, um, something that shouldn't be there, right?
Right.
In terms of that, that's strong. So tell me, you've talked to teams like Clemson football and UNC and some of these, great organizations, business organizations as well. Do you find it different in talking to them when you have, pure athletes versus a business? Is there a certain dynamic that's the same? Is there a certain dynamic that's different? How do you view that?
Yeah, we do a couple of different kind of avenues, right? And the speaking side, I think is relatively similar. Relatively similar. if we come through and partner and do some of the consulting with those organizations, we set the stage and we do some training and some preparation, but then we introduce our experiential training components, very similar to how we do it in the military. Is once we've taught it, now I want to ramp up some of the adversity in a controlled environment where we can make some mistakes and we can mentor and we can coach through that. I see obviously a big difference there of when there's physicality involved with what you can push a Division I athlete to.
Hmm.
But by and large, it's very, very similar because what you're looking at are the attributes, right? And so from an athlete, but really any high performing business, you're going to find the same things. You're going to find people with high drive. You're going to find people who are at great team ability, people who have, humility in certain areas. So those attributes, that's what we lean into, right? Is it doesn't matter if you're in the military, in business, or and that's why this we said earlier on the principles of these things, they work everywhere. Is how we select and work and develop our leaders are around those certain components. And we want to, and we use some of our training on the speaking and our workshops to try to expose some of those attributes in a way to one, either lean into it and develop it, or in some ways we're able to highlight that and be like, hey, you have a high performer over here who is actually probably in the wrong seat in the bus, right? Like super driven, super resilient. I think of one that off the top of my head is like, hey, she's sitting in marketing. Like she'd be really good in sales with those attributes of where it is. Like, bam, they made the switch and she's never looked back, right? She's in sales for the rest of her life. So I think by and large, it's no high performing teams and high performing leaders kind of look the same across different industries. And that's kind of the fun part for me is I'm able to pick up some of the things that they do, regardless of the industry, to solve some of the problems that they've got.
It, I love this whole topic, and but you have stats on your website, and probably only have time for one of them, but I think right here is I worked in recruiting and I worked a lot with military veterans, and I heard a lot of succession planning and what leaders are going to come behind in a workforce that's aging and what's that look like. And one of the stats you had is, I'm going to read it right here. Only 11% of companies have leaders ready to step up right now into roles. 11% of companies, right? I mean, that's beyond an F, right? That is pretty much it. Probably, if you're listening to this, it probably applies to you, right? That's a 9 out of 10 chance. Why is that?
Well, as I said earlier, I think if I unpack that stat, it's more so they're there. We just haven't uncovered them, right? And so it's not typically it's not a capability issue. Like people don't make you were in recruiting for a long time.
Yeah.
People don't they work very, very hard to try to hire smart and intelligent people. But if I were to dumb this down to the one thing I see across the board is, but we don't treat them that way. We hire people, and that's the big difference between the military and every other organization we work with. In a lot of ways, when you come into the military from day one, even at boot camp, we treat them like leaders because we expect everybody to lead. Different scope of authority, different responsibility, but we treat them like leaders. In the civilian sector, what I've watched is we actually treat them like followers, all
Mhm.
the way down from, this is a systematic process, right? Through kindergarten all the way up. Like we are treated like followers, and then we breed this mother may I permission-based thinker who they're not really going to act unless they get permission to do this. And so from our standpoint, it's not that you don't have the right people. It's more so you haven't trained your people. So it's a training gap that needs to exist so that we can start uncovering some of those attributes that we were just talking about to figure out who we can lean into. And then for that succession planning, hey, what is their time? Is this person 4 months out? Are they 18 months out? Like then building that, what do we need to do in order to prepare them for increased responsibility before their time comes? That's where I think that big 11% happens. If you ask people, they may want it, they just don't feel confident because there's no real training that's been kind of poured into these people to be able to step up and now go from leading myself or leading one or two people to leading a, division of 40. That's a training gap.
Love that, man. Love that. Like I think in the military, I remember when I took command, it was this big organization, and I was engaged at the time. which is a whole funny story by itself. Because in the military, you have your spouse sits in the front row, is there for the ceremony. Well, no one had ever, brought their fiance in our unit, right, to the command, and they were like, "Well, like, where does she sit?" I was like, "No, she sits in the front row," right? And I made a point of that because she was my guiding light, still is, right? After 25 years, she's still the one, back there. And I bring that up, it just, popped in my head there because she said, "Have you ever done this?" She was brand new to the whole military thing, right? So if you can imagine, me being there 7 years, taking over this, I think we were like 180 people. And she was like, "Hey, have you ever done this before?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, the biggest I've ever commanded was, I think at the time, what, 15, 16, 17. All of a sudden, here you go. Here's 180.
Yep.
Have fun, Dave. Right. And I remember her saying, "Well, how's that going to work?" And I go, "I don't know. We're going to find out though, real quick." Right. Like on day one. Whereas, for my time now in business, you'd have to prove to me that you could do that job.
Yeah.
Way right. You're not getting that. That's not happening until you prove me for years that you could take that.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that's what you're kind of thinking here, right?
Yeah.
It's the fact that business is very, very hesitant to promote people into positions until you've almost proven it well beyond, well beyond that role.
Well, we're very, very risk averse, right? We do not tolerate risks well. We do not tolerate losses well. And that is a fast and well-worn path to only retaining the risk averse. And we just do it the complete opposite on the highest performing teams. Like
Yep.
we couldn't win in combat like that. I have to trust that my team, inside of my intent, that they're willing to take some calculated risk. We develop their judgment, their discernment. You do all that through training. Did they make the best decisions all the time? No. Did they cost us money and cost us mistakes? At times, sure. But we have to be able to take the good with the bad. And those are the coachable moments that's the culture that we wanted to breed. Is I want them to take risks. I want them to take calculated risks. I want them to manage it. And because the problem that we see with that is, if you're not you can manage it, you can never really mitigate it, right? So if I don't harness that and coach it and build it, all I'm doing is deferring that risk to a later date when the consequences are probably more significant, because that person will get promoted at some point and now they've got a larger scope, and we've deferred that risk of judgment and decision making until now it's got a greater impact. So I'm just a believer of find the opportunities to train them, find the opportunities to equip them, as small as it may be. Those little moments stack up, because it's those tiny little battles which will start to determine the future of them and the organization.
Man, I love that, man. Love that show. I think we could go on for another half hour, but I always like keeping this where people can, hit it on a walk, and bounce. But I always did say at the end, I always kind of want to just pick your brain for the hell of it, right? You went to Virginia Tech, you're in the Corps of Cadets there, right? You were at the stadium for Sandman, right? The
Oh yeah.
football team, right? How was that? Like, how was that experience as a student, just that place rocking, right? That's the iconic, like, vision, right, of college football, right? And you're there as part of it. I find that to be like super cool, right? That's one of those memories you're like, you
It's
know,
awesome. Yeah, and as the core, we would work. The team was really good when I was there, and we would work in conjunction with ESPN, calling their cable. So we'd be on the field, and remember as a young kid, like it was such a cool experience, and just that place from a size of a stadium isn't anywhere near one of the largest in the country, but the
right?
way that it's built, and it could get so loud that your ears would just be ringing on the sidelines. It was phenomenal.
You were on the sidelines down there?
Oh yeah, because
Oh,
we'd run the cables and the cameras and all the mics for
really?
ESPN during the games.
Dude, that's a perk. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
I know you had your RTC. That's a perk. I
that's
mean,
right.
that's a recruiting perk. Hey man, you want to be Corps Cadet? You get on the sideline with ESPN cameras,
Some of them,
right?
yeah, yeah. It was definitely guys would fight over that opportunity for sure.
Was that like a junior senior thing, or I mean, I have to imagine your freshmen are in the stands and you're seniors on the field. If I'm
Yeah, in some instances, they had like the different angles in the core had different responsibilities. So I don't remember all of them. I know that the the Army Ranger dudes would or that were in that like company in that training
Yeah,
pipeline. They did something specific that was more serving the patrons and seats or doing something else like that. Ours in the Marine group of it, we had that with ESPN that we would run the cables and
of
things.
course,
And
you guys.
it's
Of course, the
it,
Marines. Of
that's
course, the
right.
Marines are on the field. Hey, Army guys, go and serve popcorn in the stands.
That's
Great, we
right.
got this.
When the mission is at hand, then it couldn't be messed up. They knew they had to give it to the Marines. It was fair. It was fair.
I love it, man. That's so classic. That is
Yep.
like spot on. Anybody who's had friends in both can laugh at this. And then if you need, just DM me. I'll explain it. That's hilarious. So that's worth it right there. That makes my day just hearing that.
It doesn't
That's
stop.
hilarious.
I've got a teammate, 32 years in Army Special Forces, a Green Beret, and we travel the country together. And it's that same way on an airplane and in front with the client. Like it doesn't matter. Like it constantly goes.
That's awesome. Well, look, man, you're doing great work. The fact you're bringing leadership and a concept to the market, I think is tremendous. I think there's a huge gap, and obviously you've identified it. By the way, thank you for being so great a guest. This is your third podcast today, right? So thank you for having the energy here past 5 o'clock. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you? Like, where can people go and find how to have you come speak, have you engaged, etc.
Love it. Yeah, and thanks for having me, Dave. I think LinkedIn is a place where I try to do the most of our like kind of thought leadership on different areas. So easy to find on LinkedIn. And our website is probably the best place to go grab it for speaking, for consulting, for launching an online academy now for leaders to get
Yep.
engaged in. And that's at ironleaderteam.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, look, Joe, you didn't disappoint, man. And I'm glad we can get this connected. I'm glad the Weller held the internet connections all hold, man. But I really look forward to seeing what you guys do. I think your story is great. Again, thanks for your service. Thanks for what you're doing out there, bringing this leadership training to, I think, a host of people who are going to love it. And look forward to being connected with you, man. So appreciate you being on.
Super, super appreciate it, Dave. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome. All right, guys. Hey, one more week down. Another great guest. We'll be back next week. Take care. Be safe out there.